Edward Island and Ontario and so on and so forth. So notice that the degree or the percentage of bilingualism in Canada, despite an official policy which now dates to over 25 years, is in fact still relatively low.
هناك لغتان رسميتان في كندا، ولكن من المدهش أن نسبة من يتحدث لغتين أكثر من لا يزيد عن 40%. وفي كوبيك على سبيل المثال 60% لا يتحدثون اللغة الإنجليزية. وعلى الرغم من سياسة اللغتين لكن ما زال هناك من يتحدث لغة واحدة فقط.
Now the reason why this is important is because traditionally we have talked about Canada having two solitudes, the English side and the French side. And it plays into the dynamics and the political tensions. So developing pluralism in Canada had to find a solution to these kinds of tensions.
وسبب أهمية هذا الأمر أنه في كندا يوجد كيانان لهما أهميتهما في التعددية، فلا بد من النظر إلى هذه القضية.
Now, the allophone population is, as you can see, extremely high in Ontario, where you have the greatest percentage of the population. It's not very clear, right?
What is allophone?
Allophones. Oh, yes, of course, thank you. Allophones is those who speak a language other than English or French. Allophones, other than English or French. So it's the black little box at the bottom of the slide that the second slide before that. And so here, clearly, the most diverse province is the one that has the largest population and the largest amount of immigration, Ontario, then British Columbia, and only third, Quebec and Alberta. So, now, a little bit of information, of statistics about the 2001 census. Today, there's 10.3 million people, nearly half of Canada's population, age 15 and older, not including Aboriginal or Indigenous peoples, who report British, French, or Canadian ethnic origins, right? So that would be those of European background, especially if we add 4.3 million from other European origins. In other words, German, Dutch, Belgian, Ukrainian, Italian, Greek, all of those different older immigrant populations. Then we have to add basically almost 3 million reported non-European origins. And finally, very interestingly, 3.3 million reported mixed ethnicity. So a large degree of inter-ethnic marriages. To that, we need to add also 1 million Aboriginal people, or what we prefer to call at home Indigenous peoples. After all, it is the official United Nations language of Indigenous peoples. So it's about 1 million population, of which over half of them live now in urban cities. So we think often of Indigenous people living on the reservations, the traditional, for lack of a better word, a form of ghettoization of Indigenous communities in different parcels of land in different parts of the country. But in fact, only about a quarter of Indigenous peoples live on the reservations now. Another quarter lives around those, not too far, but in small towns or cities not too far. And then over half of Indigenous people live in the urban areas, making therefore, so in many ways, in that level, immigrants and Indigenous people also, and the traditional British-French population, we all share in this urbanization phenomena of the 20th and now 21st century.
إحصائيات عام 2001 تذكر أن 10 مليون و3 من 10 من أصل أوروبي، من أصل بريطاني وفرنسي، و4.3 من 10 من أصول 4.3 من 10 مليون من أصول أوروبية مختلفة، و2.9 من 10 مليون من أصول غير أوروبية، و3.3 من 10 مليون من مختلف الجنسيات، وذكر أن هناك 1,000,000 من أصول أو السكان الأصليين لكندا، ويقول أن أكثر من نصف هؤلاء يعيشون الآن في المدن وليس في الريزرفيشنز، المستوطنات، أو ما أدري إيش ترجمتها باللغة العربية، المهم المحميات. يعني مصطلح أمريكي اخترعوه للسكان الأصليين، وهناك قصص كثيرة عن هذه المستوطنات أو المحميات، ويعيشون يعني في المدن مختلطين ببقية السكان.
If we look at the general immigration patterns in Canada by regions of origin, notice that I started with language, then I went with ethnicity, and now I'm looking at origins in terms of geographical. These are three kinds of identities. And when we deal with pluralism, we have to deal with how do we manage the diversity of identity claims that people have in one particular, in this case, nation-state called Canada, or in any social arrangement. In terms of regions of origin, by far the largest increase over the last 10 years is, which was already in many ways an important source, is from East Asia. So that means that we now have more people coming from East Asia than coming from traditional European background. And they mostly go to the western part, of course, for geographical reason, so that in British Columbia, for example, the second language there is certainly not French, it's Chinese. And in some regions of Vancouver, Burnaby, it's actually Punjabi. And so depending on where you are, the notion of a second language in Western Canada is highly debated, and the sense is that, well, French is really not important to us in our region of the world, of the country. So, and this is only going to increase in the future with this high immigration from East Asia. The other sources, as you can see, where the second element from South Asia includes a high degree of Muslims, predominantly from Pakistan, but also from India and Bangladesh. You also have Muslims in the latter part of the last two categories at the bottom of West Asia in Africa, where a significant portion of those immigrants are Muslims.
يقول المهاجرون لهم 3 هويات مختلفة. يعني عندما نتحدث عن التعددية لابد أن نراعي هذه القضية. وأكبر زيادة في ال10 سنوات الأخيرة جاءت من شرق آسيا، وهؤلاء هجرتهم أكثر من الهجرة من أوروبا، وحتى أن اللغة الثانية في غرب كندا هي الصيني، وفي فانكوفر اللغة الصينية، وفي فانكوفر البنجابية، وهذا الأمر سيزداد في المستقبل، يعني زيادة الهجرة من آسيا. ومصادر الهجرة أيضا الأخرى من جنوب شرق آسيا، ومعظمهم من المسلمين من باكستان والهند وبنغلاديش، وهناك نسبة محدودة مهاجرة من أفريقيا.
There's a fair number of, as I said, from West Asia and Africa who are from Muslim backgrounds. What I want to say is that from Southeast Asia, you see that there is a decrease in people coming from Southeast Asia, and most of them do not come from Indonesia or Malaysia. They come from non-Muslim countries in the area, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. And so what's very interesting is, even though Indonesia is the largest Muslim country in the world, are very few Indonesians who immigrate to Canada. It probably has to do with the weather. But by the way, it's also the case towards the United States. If you look at the immigrant population to the United States, it's very interesting to see that very few South Indonesians, in fact, immigrate to Canada as well. To the United States as well. So not all regions of the world immigrate to the same percentage of their population to either Canada or the United States.
هناك نقص في المهاجرين من جنوب شرق آسيا، والنقص هذا يعني